In 2013 in the UK, about 3,500 EVs were registered. An EV is an electronic vehicle. This is new electronic cars, things like the Prius, all that kind of stuff. To date, over the last 12 months, we're looking at a figure closer to 100,000 of these things. So EV technology is becoming more and more acceptable. People are buying into the idea of not looking for fuel, not looking for diesel, not looking for petrol. They're happy to go all electric. If you're into your cars and you're into your bikes, you've probably heard of Tesla. Tesla are a company that are building kind of performance-based EVs. These are things that have this ludicrous mode. You can do 0 to 60 in the same time as a top flight Ferrari or a McLaren, but you can do it in complete silence. I'm a petrol head. I like my cars as much as I like my bikes. Wouldn't mind going a Tesla. The day has come for me to lose my electric motorcycle virginity, and I'm going to be popping my cherry on this Zero Motorcycles SR. As you can see from the glitzy video, Zero Motorcycles are a Californian-based company. They've been around for 10 or 11 years now, I think. If you don't already know, California as a state is like a super state. It's like a country within a country. Financially, it's got pots and pots of cash, and it kind of dictates what sometimes the rest of the world has to follow in terms of legislation. Electronic vehicles out there, because of the smog and the pollutants and all that kind of stuff, means that they're now thinking ahead a little bit further than anywhere else in the world in terms of EV and where we need to go. Hence Zero Motorcycles being based there. In the 10 or 11 years that Zero have been around, they've raised nearly, I think, $135 million of investment. So clearly, people are getting behind the idea of this being the future. Whether or not I'm getting behind the idea of it being the future, I don't know. Maybe I'll have a little bit more of an idea once we've been for a ride. But what exactly is it that I'm going to be riding? Well, to look at, you might think that it's a Chinese 125. It does look a little bit dinky, and there are bits and pieces of it I think they've been designed, but I don't necessarily think they've been styled. There's no beauty going on here. There's nothing amazing or jaw-dropping about the way that it looks, that like perhaps the Saralea might have. If you haven't seen the Saralea, it's an electric bike that races in the Zero TT. Looks like a cafe racer. It's electric, but it's a pretty cool looking thing. The Zero, on the other hand, has evolved and gone down the lines of being a traditional looking motorcycle. Obviously, a couple of things that are missing. The first is this. There's no clutch lever. Operates much like a twist and go scooter. So obviously there's no gears to play with. There's also no engine. What we have in here is called the ZF13, which is a lithium ion battery pack with a brushless motor. There's also no exhaust. There's also no noise. This is the thing that's going to throw me the most, I think, today. The SR comes in two forms. You can have the standard one, which you're looking at here, weighs 188 kilos. There's also the option of buying this kind of battery enhancer pack. It doesn't enhance the performance or the power, it enhances the range that you have, but it also adds another 20 kilos. So all up, ready to ride, I'm not going to say fully fueled, but ready to ride, you're looking at a bike that weighs about 208 kilos at that stage. That's quite a lot. It's not a lot when you consider your average litre sports bike, for example, but this doesn't look like your average litre sports bike. It's quite a small thing, it's quite dinky. So when you pick it up, you realise that it doesn't come with dinky weight. It has 3 modes. It has an eco mode, which is apparently very, very soft. It has a sport mode, which I'm interested in, which is everything. And by everything, I mean 69 horsepower. We'll ignore the power and go straight for the torque. 146 Newton meters of torque. That's the same as a Ducati Panigale Superleggera. That is an absolute truckload of torque. So I'm looking forward to trying that. There's also a custom mode, which obviously, this bike being electric, comes with an app. You can go into your phone and you can manually adjust and set to what you're looking for, kind of dynamic riding approach that you're looking for. I'll shut my mouth now. I'm going to go and jump on the bike. So our day starts and finishes here at Brooklands, the home of British motorsport. We've spent most of our time listening to people doing massive skids in supercharged V8, Mercedes over the back at Mercedes World. Car park behind us is littered with Porsches and kind of petrol head good stuff, the high performance stuff. It's kind of the right and the wrong place to be on the Zero. It feels like it fits. At the same time, the jaded old hack in me feels a little bit embarrassed to be cutting around in such a cool and prestigious place on a bike that's got more in common with my MacBook than it does my SR project bike. The riding impression, the initial riding impression, pulled out of here in eco mode, and within about half a mile I realised I was just on a motorbike. It's that simple. It feels like a bike, it goes like a bike, it stops like a bike, it just doesn't sound like a bike. And that for me throughout the entire day was probably the hardest thing for me to get my head around. The notion of not annoying the neighbours on a Sunday morning popped into my head. Nobody's going to hear you sneaking the bike out the garage. The notion of pedestrians not hearing you coming is a weird thing. People walking their dogs up the lane where we've been, up towards Box Hill and on the roads up and round the back of there. Normally these guys are jumping in hedges when you're coming on a bike. They can hear you coming from miles away. You sometimes see them giving you a bit of a sneer or a tut about the fact that you're riding a bike and making loads of noise. Today there was none of that. It was like we were just in complete stealth mode. It probably sounds a little bit louder when you're watching me ride past in the footage than the noise that you can hear when you're on the bike. The experience is visually is very much the same, but in terms of audibly and what you can hear and what's going on in your head, it's all new. And there's a lot to take in, there's a lot to get used to with the bike. The fact that it has no clutch and no gears didn't really make too much of a difference to me. What did make a difference to me was flicking the thing from eco mode into sport. Eco mode was a bit flat. I can see why you would have it. I can see why commuting across town every day in eco mode would make riding this thing a fairly sensible way of getting around. Sport mode is the opposite of sensible. It comes alive. There's a shed load of torque the second you grab a handful of throttle. If this is the future, fair play to the Showa suspension in this bike. It's got a lot to cope with. The mass that's going on in here, you can feel. There's no denying it. It feels the same to me as when you're riding a long Harley Davidson that's got a lot of very low down weight in terms of the weight between the wheels. But obviously the wheelbase on this bike is shorter than the typical cruiser, so it's still got that agile feeling. You can still pitch it into a corner like you would a commuter bike or possibly even a sports bike, but the suspension has to cope with, or it has more demands on it, I think, than a traditional internal combustion bike. If you're a sports bike fan, or you like going fast, or you like that kind of kick up the ass feeling, and if you like being the first away from every single set of traffic lights, you're still going to be able to do that on the Zero SR. It's still, in my mind, I would class it in sport mode with all that torque as a performance motorcycle. I think what Zero are trying to do here is trying to make guys like me feel as at home as possible the first time we get onto one of these. Part of me thinks that I'd quite like for it to look like it's from the future as well. The tech's from the future. I think they could have maybe been a little bit bolder with the styling and just been maybe a little bit more out there with their approach to try and snare new guys onto riding bikes like this. So the bike that we rode today was the Zero SR, which comes in at £15,690. Yes, that's a lot of money. Plus on top we had the additional battery pack, which is a further 2,600 quid. So you're looking at 16, 17, you're looking at knocking on the door with £18,000. That's big sports bike money, that's big Harley money, that's big cruiser money. And this bike is none of those things. This bike is a tech hungry, tech heavy bike. It's designed to appeal to bikers that are into tech, or tech guys that want to commute on a bike that suits their nature. We're waffling a little bit, and we should move from how much it costs into how far it goes. So with this pack on it that it's got, when we flicked the clocks on, it said that we had about 138 miles of range. That's a considerable amount. We trotted across to Box Hill, maybe 25 minutes away, something like that. I'm guessing it was probably 10 to 15 miles away. And I was amazed to find when we got there that the bike had recharged itself. So it's got a regenerative system on it. I guess it would be like KERS in Formula 1. If you get on the brakes, it takes some of the power from you being on the brakes and puts it back into the motors. And when you close the throttle, it also regenerates its own power. So when I took the key out of the bike at Box Hill, even though I'd done maybe 15 miles, my range had extended by a further 10 or 11 miles, which is basically witchcraft. So I jumped on it then and rode off up the hill. We went off to find a location to shoot at. I put it in sport mode and stuck the thing on the stop and just basically tried to ride it as fast as I could. So it turns out, if you have it in sport mode and you have 5 minutes of fun, the range halves, which is interesting. I've been on sports bikes that have a 90-mile tank range if you ride like a goon, but there's something a little bit disconcerting about not knowing where the nearest power charging place might be. So 10 minutes ago I had a 140-mile range, go fast for a bit, now it's on 76. That caused some concern for me. It turns out we needn't have worried too much. We've ridden all day, we've made it back here, and there's about 35 miles of range left in the bike. But it did mean that I ended up changing my riding style. I didn't just want to stick the thing on the stock for the rest of the day and see if I could thrash it to empty. Part of me wanted to see if I could conserve a little bit of that power, or maybe even regenerate some of that range on the ride back to the hotel. There's a fast charge option on it, so within 2.5 hours you can have recharged 95% of the battery, but to do a full 100% recharge, you're looking at about 8 hours. So that's overnight, or that's all day while you're in the office. The future doesn't necessarily involve pulling up at the petrol pumps and filling up your tank with petrol. Whether you like that or not, it's kind of already out of your hands. It's certainly already out of my hands.
Have you got any of those massive Duracell batteries? No?
And it just leaves me with the question of, would I be happy tipping £18,000 of money into a bike that delivers the kind of experience that this does? This is just a really kind of silent, stealthy, slightly weird, hard to get my head around way of doing something that at the minute internal combustion is absolutely nailing. So after having spent a day on the thing, if I'm going to stick my flag in the sand, I'm saying petrol 1, 3-pin plug nil. So we guessed, starting at Brooklands, kind of the home of British motorsport. The place is as iconic as it gets in terms of going fast, that old school racing vibe that British motorsport has. We thought the best thing to do would be to jump on this, take a 20-minute ride across to Box Hill. There's always an old school biker here. He's got a million roll-ups in his lungs. He spent his life riding bikes as fast as he can. The idea of new tech to that guy is just completely alien. So we came here to find one, and we actually found 3 by the time I'd taken my stupid helmet off. The guy that owns that R1 there laughed at it, said that, you know, asked how fast it does 0 to 60 on paper, and then claimed that his bike was quicker. So I called him out and said that I'd race him, and right now he's tucking into a cheeseburger over there and he absolutely melted. You know, it's kind of, they want to say that they don't want to race these things, they want to say that there's still more performance in those, but when it came to it and it came to the crunch, he was too scared to put his, that looks like an 03 R1, it's probably got 150 horsepower at the wheel. He didn't want to race the plucky little sewing machine from California. They picked and poked their way around it. Some of the guys commented on how good the welds around the headstock were. My response to that is, the typical buyer for this probably doesn't care what the welds look like around the headstock. He's more interested in what the app does for this bike, because obviously there's an app with this bike. They gave it a little bit of a kick in and then slowly came to the party. You could see that they could appreciate that petrol's running out. There's going to come a time where you can't just nip down to the garage and fill your bike up. So we've got to find an alternative, and at the minute Zero are head and shoulders above everybody else in providing us with that alternative. It's interesting seeing what older bikers think about new technology, and it's you know, the reaction that we predicted was exactly the kind of reaction that we got. I'd just like it if that old guy would have had a race with me to 60. I think he'd have been buying the coffees, definitely.